Hey everyone, my name is Rachel, and today I have a question for you. What do puppies and Nazis have in common? Now, don't worry, I'm not telling a really terrible joke, although I would kind of be intrigued what the punchline was. The actual answer, because this is a serious question, is a man named Konrad Lorenz. Now, Konrad Lorenz is, or was, an Austrian scientist, and what does he have to do with puppies and Nazis? Well, one of the biggest things he was known for was studying the cuteness of animals and what made some animals, like puppies, so cute. He was really involved in that. And he was also involved in aiding racial studies in Nazi concentration camps. Seriously though, if you guys haven't seen the podcast I do with Thomas and Stephen, Holy Kool-Aid and Rationality Rules, it's called The Here and How, and it's really, really cool. It's a science podcast where every week we do these long, sort of hour and a half long discussions on sciencey topics. And a week or two ago, I ran an episode on the science of cute, titled What Makes Some Things So Cute? And Konrad Lorenz was one of the big scientists we mentioned because he's one of the most influential people in the science of cute and what makes things cute. But he's also a really, really interesting guy. If you want to go check out that podcast before or after this video, you can do. It's going to be linked down below. You can watch it on YouTube or you can find it on iTunes, Spotify, whatever your podcast app, listening device thing of choice is, whatever, you'll find it on there. So despite his dubious Nazi links, Lorenz had some really, really interesting and important work throughout his career, so I figured it would make quite an interesting video if we just talk a little about him and his career, his work, his background today, and then have a little bit of a discussion about him, because despite being a bit of a dodgy character, he's also a really interesting one. So, Konrad Lorenz was born in 1903 in what at the time was Austria-Hungary. He was one of the biggest names throughout history in zoology, which is the study of animals and how they interact with their ecosystems. He was also a big name in ethology, and he's often considered the father of ethology, and that is the study of animal behaviour. And he was also really big into ornithology, which is of course the study of birds. Some of his major work included studying instinctive behaviour in animals, and one of the big things he did was studying imprinting in babies, particular baby birds. So you know how often when like a baby goose, for example, is born, they often bond with the first moving object they see just hours after birth? That's usually their caregiver, and there's reasons for that. There's behavioural and genetic and awesome reasons for that. It's called imprinting, and Lorenz was one of the first people to study it in a lot of detail. He was one of the most important anyway. Probably his most influential work was this study on grey-lag geese that he published in 1935 in a book titled The Companion in the Environment of Birds. It was where he spoke about imprinting and the reasons for it and the consequences of it in a lot of detail, and it was one of the most influential books in the animal world of the time. He said that the behaviour was a mix of biological and environmental stimuli. They might have this instinctive drive towards certain behaviours, but unless animals have the right stimulus, or they observe or engage in the right kind of behaviour, they might never learn the correct, almost useful way to behave. Lorenz also believed that animals' behaviour was closely linked to evolution. He was big into his, Darwinian evolution. He said that if certain behaviours increased fitness and chance of survival, then they'd be most likely taught to the next generation, or become instinctual and controlled by a biological mechanism in the animal's brain or body, and therefore controlled by genes. He also believed that if you truly wanted to understand an animal's behaviour, you couldn't just study that in a lab. You couldn't just study it with man-made experiments. You couldn't just come up with something and test animals, in a lab setting, in an artificial setting. He didn't believe that. He liked to observe animals in their wild habitats, what he called their natural context. One of his coolest pieces of research, and the reason that I found out about him in the first place, was the research he did into the science of cute and cuteness. He came up with this list of facial and bodily characteristics that animals and human babies share that make them appear cute and make adults of the species want to look after them and mother them, care for them, and so on. He called this list, and I hope I can pronounce this right, because Austrian German words are so difficult to pronounce. He called this list of features Kindchenschema, and it often involved features like having a large head compared to your body, having big eyes, chubby cheeks, pudgy little arms and legs. He said all of these things and some more made an animal appear cute, and it kind of triggered these mechanisms in the adults of the species that made them want to, like, take care of the little one, and it also made the adults feel happy and made them feel bonded to the little ones. If you want to hear a little bit more about that in more detail, and also all the other random discussions you heard in the episode, check out the Here and How podcast. Like I say, the link is below. The interesting kind of point of Lorenz's life, though, came in the 40s. He was carrying on doing his research as normal when he was interrupted by World War II. During the war, he was initially recruited by the Nazi Party as a medic, even though he wasn't actually like a doctor or a human doctor. He was appointed to the Department of Neurology and Psychiatry in a hospital in Posen. For a long time, he actually denied being an active member of the Nazi Party and was like, yeah, I didn't have much to do with it. He claimed a case of wrong place, wrong time. He didn't talk about those war years very much. However, I did find this really interesting quote from him. So in 1942, he started working as a doctor in concentration camps, and he said afterwards, I had the occasion to observe the striking parallels between the psychological effects of Nazi and Marxist education. It was then that I began to realise the nature of indoctrination as such, which I know he's kind of comparing like Marxism and like Nazi ethics and stuff like that, but I just kind of find it quite interesting that, you know, maybe he was kind of hinting about being indoctrinated into the Nazi Party, potentially, like maybe he's trying to use that as an excuse, I'm not sure. Anyway, he carried on working in concentration camps for a while, and then in 1944 he was captured and spent 4 years as a Russian prisoner of war. So that was like his time during the war, but the kind of biggest mystery, I guess, in his life is what exactly he was doing as a doctor in Nazi concentration camps. It's something he never really spoke about, and there's been a lot of speculation about. For a long time, he refused to talk about it. He denied doing anything bad or controversial, and he even denied knowing the full extent of what the Nazis were doing to Jewish people and other prisoners in concentration camps. He claimed he didn't know so many were being killed and things like that. However, this is where it gets interesting. In 2015, he was already dead. At this point, he died a few years before. But in 2015, Salzburg University stripped the honorary doctorate that they'd given him after they discovered evidence of, and I quote, his deep involvement with the Nazi Party. One of the big things that came to light was his NSDAP application, which had some pretty worrying stuff on there. And when I say worrying stuff, it was talking about how his scientific work was dedicated to the Nazi Party's ideals, and there were, at the same time, found some kind of dodgy letters he wrote to colleagues and mentors, which had some pretty anti-Semitic content in there. It came to light that his main role throughout those war years, from I think like 42 onwards, was working as not just a doctor but a psychologist in the Office of Racial Policy for the Nazis. And it's thought that he was actually working on conducting what they call racial studies on prisoners in concentration camps, which is a little bit vague but sounds very dodgy when you know what the Nazis were doing during that time. So one source in particular I found wrote that he received funding from the Nazi Party to conduct a study which resulted in, and I quote here, an elaborate theory which attempted to justify eugenic measures through analogies with domesticated animals. So he wasn't overly like explicit or obvious in his kind of racism or anti-Semitic, that's a hard word to say, Semitic, no, he wasn't overly like explicit or whatever, but in some of his work he strongly implied that Jewish people, and again I quote, were bred to prefer decadence and degeneration. And then he spoke about how unless these people were disposed of, or unless these people were taken care of or removed from society, that it would lead to the degradation of all society. Society would fall apart if these people continued to breed and thrive. It's pretty disturbing stuff to read, I'll be honest. And in 1940, so this was even kind of before the war and before he was working in concentration camps and stuff, he apparently wrote an article that, and again I quote, voiced eugenic ambitions far beyond those even of Hitler or Himmler. So it sounds like he had these views way before the war, which is a little bit worrying. Like I said, he's also suspected of having conducted racial studies on people in concentration camps, and he once described Jewish people as having become asocial through defects. Kind of attempting to be in his defense here. He's said to have regretted his involvement with the Nazi Party afterwards, after the war, but I'm not really sure how much that excuses him. At first, kind of at a glance, and for a long time afterwards, he put forward this idea that he was just a guy in the wrong place at the wrong time. He was just trying to keep his head down when war broke out around him. He claimed this for so long, I'm talking decades. There was this article written in 1994 by Peter Klopfer, who said that he was a close personal friend of Lorenz and he'd worked with him and stuff like that. And he wrote that Lorenz emphatically denied he'd had Nazi sympathies and explained the offending articles as a naive effort to obtain and then retain an academic post in difficult times. However, more people decided to look into his past, and after he died, a lot of things like letters and unpublished articles came to light. One source wrote that this is not just a chap keeping his head down in bad times, but someone fully exploiting and endorsing the situation. There were probably various reasons for this. The Nazis provided opportunities which did not exist before. This may explain, it does not excuse. And also, like I say, years later, so I think it might have come out after he died, I'm not sure, but years later his application for membership to the Nazi Party in the first place was found, and there was this line on it that he'd written, I mentioned this earlier, but this line said, "I'm able to say that my whole scientific work is devoted to the ideas of the National Socialists." A little bit worrying there. So that is just a very, very brief overview of the life and the work of Konrad Lorenz. There's so much more detail here. There's so much more insane stuff going on. And there's an amazing amount of stuff that we don't know yet. There's a lot of stuff that was tried to get covered up, a lot of stuff that was tried to be hidden. We still don't know what these racial studies were that he was supposedly conducting on people in concentration camps. We don't even know to what extent he was involved. Maybe he was just kind of sat in the background, knowing it was happening but not participating. Maybe he was leading the studies. Maybe he was just one of many people involved. Maybe he didn't even know it was happening that much and it's just been kind of accredited to him because he was at the same place. Who knows? This is stuff that we don't know yet because there's not enough evidence for some things, and like I say, some things have tried to be covered up and stuff like that. But with this, I want to try and pass the discussion over to you. This is a pretty heavy one, I know. But without a doubt, Lorenz was an interesting guy, to say the least. I just find it insane that a man who is responsible for such a big study as looking at the cuteness of animals and babies is also the same guy who is, so closely associated with atrocities of the Nazis. It's insane. So in the description of this video down below, I've put loads and loads of resources for you guys if you want to go read, find out more about this guy. There's a lot of nice, interesting, simple, easy to read articles about him, and a couple of academic papers written about him, things like that. You can go and read the stuff that he has written. Some of it's online, some of it you have to buy. A lot of it was originally in German, but it's been translated to English and stuff like that. But if you do want to read the stuff below, you can do, and let me know what you thought of it. Couple of kind of discussion points for you guys, because I'd love to hear your thoughts. But what do you think of Konrad Lorenz? Like, was he an anti-Semitic man who manipulated his work to push his political agenda? Or was he just a scientist and an animal lover who was trying to survive in a really tough political climate? Do you think it's fair that his honorary degree was stripped from him after his death? Or do you think they should have just let it be and moved on because he's dead after all? Do you think his actions during the war, you know, those few years, do you think they really should overshadow all his contributions to science and how much he's done for animal and biological sciences? Or do you think they should be viewed as separate? Do you think they should be viewed alongside each other? I don't know. Just let me know your thoughts on this really, really interesting and slightly worrying man. I'd like to hear your thoughts. But for now, thank you so much for watching today. Kyra says hi. She's currently sleeping next door. We went to the park this morning again because it's her favourite place and she loves it, and we had so much fun. But as always, she tired herself out. And also, it's really, really warm today, so she's been chasing ice cubes around the floor, playing with them and having a lot of fun, because I want her to stay hydrated and also cool, and she loves it. So she's currently snoozing on the settee because she's a tired little girl. But she says hi. And for now, thank you so much for watching today. I really do appreciate you guys for watching. Like I say, let me hear your thoughts, and hopefully I'll see you again soon. If you liked this video and you want to hear me talk more about sciencey stuff, you can check out the Here and How podcast, which I host with Rationality Rules and Holy Kool-Aid. But for now, I just want to say an extra special thank you to everyone who is supporting me on Patreon this month. You guys are incredible. A special thank you goes out to Gambit and his Chauffeur, Mark Dauner, Eric Reid, Christian Berg, Rachel B. Royer, Religion is BS, Matthew Meinema, Jaylee Moore, Sir Michael Moore, Jadeon Sheppard, Greg Ladd, and Pixelated Skeptic. Also go check out everyone who is listed down in the description and on the video end screen here. You guys are all amazing, and I cannot thank you enough.